Well, we'll get started. Thank you very much for coming today. We're here to discuss the operating and capital supplemental budgets that we're planning to pass over to the Senate in the next few days. Representative Hunter will give the details on the operating budget, and Representative Dunshee will give you the details around the capital budget. But first, I just want to give you a brief view of what you can expect over the next several days. You have a list of bills that are necessary to implement the budget, and those bills will be heard in Ways and Means Committee today at 1 o'clock, and we'll take executive action on a number of those bills this afternoon as well. There's a capital budget meeting in about 25 minutes to take action on the constitutional debt limit bill as well. We placed a striking amendment on the bar to substitute House Bill 2127. That's the operating budget that we passed over to the Senate on the last day of regular session on March 8th. And we'll be taking action on that starting tomorrow. It's not an agreed-to budget yet, but I think it reflects our core values, protecting K-12 education and the safety net. And it also incorporates some of the concerns and ideas that we heard from the other side. We'll continue to reach out and to talk and to negotiate with the Senate as we move along. But we know that in order for us to have any opportunity to get done within the 30-day time frame of this special session, which is next Tuesday, that we have to begin this process. Someone has to get the ball rolling. That's why we're here today, and that's why we're moving forward. And with that, I'll turn it over to Representative Hunter to go through the operating budget.
Morning, everybody. So we put a budget on the bar today that is similar in most of the details to the budget we passed out on March 8th. We changed some of the structural elements in it, so a lot of the numbers in the balance sheet move around quite a bit. This is mostly an effort to keep our process moving, to keep the procedural steps, many of which have significant delays built in to allow for transparency so that people can see what we're doing. Number of 24-hour waiting periods from when we introduce a striking amendment to when it can be acted on in the House for second reading and be amended, and then another 24-hour waiting period for when we go to third reading again, so that people have an opportunity to see what has actually changed in it. The big changes in this budget proposal are the removal of the K-12 apportionment shift. We're assuming something that many of you have covered already, which is using $238 million. It's an adjustment to how our ending fund balance works. We're calling it the working capital reserve. We're modernizing the way we handle cash. And as we went back and looked at how we handle the local government sales tax account, we found there's a lot of money sitting there for a long time. Many states, including states with AAA bond ratings, use the same mechanism. Instead of leaving that money sitting in a separate account for a month and a half to 2 months, we're now having that money sit in the general fund, which is how we normally would do concentration anyway. It doesn't change our cash position. It doesn't delay any payments. Keeps everything within the current biennium. The adjustments that we make to the budget, we make numerous small adjustments to keep the budget functional, to keep the start dates on cuts current and effective. Leaves us with about a $336 million ending fund balance. There are no reductions in education, in higher ed. Remains the single administrative reduction in our early learning, which is not a reduction that will be felt, we think, by children on the ground. It doesn't change the healthcare budget from March 8th. Makes a couple of minor changes that we heard pretty consistent feedback that one of the reductions we had done in the DD budget couldn't actually be accomplished and would have put a bunch of our assisted living partner facilities out of business. And we found that the required 1163 training cost less than we had originally assumed, thankfully. There's some administrative savings and corrections. In other human services, there was a restoration that we had tried to do on TANF, on the size of the TANF grants, a 5% increase that we're no longer going to try and restore. We'll stay with the original budget from last year. and we're capturing $5 million in underspend in the Housing and Essential Needs program. It's taken us a little longer to ramp that new program up than we had originally expected it to take, and we're, again, capturing about $5 million in administrative savings there, and there's some changes in the natural resources that use dedicated funds in different ways. The proposal, as we said, balances in the current biennium. We have done an outlook for the 13-15 biennium, and we're close. We're about $45–50 million off, and I'll point out that that's about 3 orders of magnitude smaller than the error that we would assume in the revenue forecast in that time period. And those corrections can easily be made just with normal budgetary changes in the 13-15 time period. So we're comfortable that as we come out of the recession, we move into a relatively stable model moving forward. And I'll point out that coming into the special session in December, if you'd looked at an outlook, you would have found a several billion-dollar shortfall. And so the changes that we're making in the package of bills that we're doing with this, along with the changes in the budgets, bring down the expected shortfall in the 13-15 biennium by almost all of the problem, leaving the problem in the sort of the normal range of budget problems. And I would, after the last 2 years, I'd be very happy to move into the normal range of budget problems. The bills that we're looking at doing, we're going to hear them in committee starting at 1 o'clock this afternoon. We are repealing Initiative 728. The revenue that would have gone into that can be more effectively used, funding our basic education requirements. As the court has clearly pointed out, that's the top priority for us. We were basically double counting the growth. All of us who did the basic education planning process assumed that we would use the revenue from 728 to fund the new basic education requirements. So this removes about $1 billion from the 13-15 problem definition. In that, there is a study, a basically joint select committee with 8 legislators and 3 appointees from the governor's office to create a plan for how we are actually going to address the McCleary problem, which is not covered in my assumptions about the 13-15 biennium. None of the budgets that we are looking at today have a resolution for our required step up in funding in the 13-15, 15-17, and 17-19 biennia to address the requirements in the McCleary. We will all agree that we will need to do that. That will be a significant legislative planning exercise this summer. You'll be able to hear about that this afternoon. Yes, the Working Capital Reserve Bill, a balanced budget bill that will require a balanced budget in the current biennium with a 4-year outlook. Largely technical bill about revenue consolidation. We'll be hearing a bill that proposes reduction in the 2007 early retirement factors and elimination of that. K-12 health benefit bill, which again you'll hear about. A fix for DSHS support enforcement that we didn't quite get right earlier in the regular session. A similar problem with how interpreters are handled. We're trying to address a court issue and significant changes in community supervision that we think will have a tremendous long-term reduction in recidivism based on experience in other states and experience in a pilot project we've been doing in King County. So in closing, we have a budget that is balanced, that has a reasonable projection for 13-15, and does not make cuts in K-12 education or in higher education.
Thank you. So I'm here actually about the #1 priority of our caucus, which was to create jobs. And if you have looked at the websites of other caucuses, they've all said the same thing. And it's been very frustrating, the pseudo-negotiations that we've been through. And so our caucus feels that there's actually an urgency and that you people are all covering the wrong story here. And if you look at this morning's Olympian, John Gillis gets it right that about 12,000 people are going to lose their unemployment benefits, run out of them on April 22nd. So really jobs are what our caucus priority has been. And so we're moving a budget forward that has, Senator Kilmer and I have built this, attempting to incorporate as many of the Republican ideas as we could. Their last objection was to use the cleanup money out of MODCA for bonding for cleanup, so we actually have dropped that, and that, oddly enough, the number of that is $238 million, not related to the operating budget number, but an odd coincidence, and hopefully getting to a position that we can get some agreement from them. Jobs really are important. Politicians used to say things like we can grow our way out of the economy. That seems to have left the argument, the discussion. I want to bring that back in. But I want you to listen for 2 minutes to a woman who was actually an architect and is now attempting to be doing ironworking, and she actually articulates the situation for many people better than I can. And so if you start that.
I'm a registered architect, and I've worked in that industry over 20 years, but it slowed down about 3 years ago. Right. It really didn't make the press. 50% of architects across the country were basically laid off. Wow. Or lost their jobs, went out of business, whatever. And it was slow to, I had to make some decisions, so I looked into going into the trades. I just started a few months ago, and I've been dispatched to 3 jobs. They were a few days in length, so it's not something like a normal office job where you would get work for 40 days, and there's nothing with benefits and stuff like that. You have to build up hours to get that, so we all need work to build up those benefits. I went down to the food bank, and I've talked to a lot of people. I handed out turkeys at something for Thanksgiving that was with a friend for a volunteer deal, and there are just whole families hanging, waiting for this kind of help. Right. And it's not charity. It's unemployment comes out of wages that you made in the past. It's an insurance that you paid into, so I just feel like something has to be done to keep balls rolling. Absolutely, we need the construction funds to go through, and we need the work. For example, in our union, we're iron workers. We do anything with steel. There's a lot of rebar that goes into construction work in highways, roads, bridges, right off the bat. But we do all the structural steel, we do everything else. I've got friends in other trades that are doing concrete, they're laborers. One of them was just laid off. I've got people that are electricians. They're all very slow. It's construction-wide, it's a problem right now. And until the economy picks back up, we're going to be struggling with this. So people need something to keep themselves going.
Sure. So you need to do jobs. We have the construction season coming very quickly upon us. The Republicans have said, hold this until we get the operating budget, and now they're not negotiating the operating budget until we do these policy change bills. It's very frustrating to people who need work, to these people who are going to lose their unemployment. A coalition of business and labor came together at the beginning of December and said, we want to do a $2 billion package, put companies to work, put people to work. The Republicans said, no, that was too big. We then said, okay, we'll come back to about 1.2, somewhere in there. We did that. Then they say, we don't want to do the cleanup bonds. We said, okay, we won't do that. The spot we're at, we are attempting to meet them at every possible way to get a compromise and to get jobs. And that's the point. That's what's on the bar in front of you. Thank you.
Thanks. Well, we've got a few minutes to answer questions.
Can you talk specifically about the early retirement aspect? Is that eliminating all early retirement benefits for employees hired after July 1st, or is there some nuance there?
The bill that's been introduced by Representative Hunter eliminates the 2007 early retirement factors for new employees. It does not do the 2000 factors as well. It's
Can
a
you
piece.
explain that for people who don't know the 2007 factors versus the 2000?
There were 2 different sets of early retirement factors that granted. One set was granted in 2000, I think when we were in the tie here. The other set was done in 2007 as part of the elimination of the gain sharing benefits that we unwound that year. This particular bill removes the set that were granted in 2007, we'll go through the technical details of the bill later this afternoon, but it's half of the proposal that the Senate Republicans would like to have, and it's about as far as we think you can actually get the votes for to move the bill forward. You could look at the actuarial numbers when we have the hearing in a couple of hours, or it's in the fiscal note for the bill.
And I'll just point out there's a significant amount of concern even within our caucus about the impacts that it would have, in particular classifications of employees, whether it's a teacher who's put in 30 years or, teaching up to 65 in a difficult classroom, or if it's a CPS worker or someone who works at Western or Eastern State Hospital. There are a large number of classifications that having them work until 65 puts them at risk for workers' comp issues and a number of other issues as well.
This saves almost $1 billion over the next 25 years. It is new employees that start after July 1st. In the last 5 years, we've done reductions in the pension system that have totaled almost $10 billion. With this will be almost $11 billion of savings counted over a 25-year period in total reductions in pension benefits. Our ability to eliminate pension benefits that have been already earned is very limited legally. So this one is for new employees only. Does not involve using money from the unfunded liability account, which had been the original Senate proposal, but does make the policy change.
Questions. First, generally you don't roll out a operating budget proposal unless you have the votes in the caucus. So could you tell us if you have the votes in the caucus to move this bill? And second, what remains to be negotiated given what you proposed? What's the differences between what's out there to be resolved?
So a budget will get rolled out from the floor because that's where it is. I mean, the current budget is in rules. Actually, it's been moved to the floor calendar. So that doesn't come through the committee. The bill's coming out of committee. We actually don't know if we have the votes for all these. We are negotiating with the Senate today. If the pension bill is to pass, it will require a significant number of Republican votes, a large number of Republican votes, because I don't believe we have the votes in the caucus to pass that bill. There are a couple of other bills that may be difficult to pass with only Democratic votes. And that's part of how we are negotiating this budget, is how many votes there are in each caucus. And if you can't get to 50 in the House, you can't negotiate that bill anymore. I would assume that we would have votes for the operating budget in the caucus.
We just caucused on the budget before we came here, but it's essentially very similar to the bill that we passed on the last day of session. So I don't know that there would be any differences in the vote that we experienced on the last day of the regular session.
Repealing 728 will catch some folks' attention, and they're going to say, well, that's a cut to education. Explain how you can say this is not cutting education when we're repealing that.
How can we say that we're not cutting education? Well, 728 is not funded now. So if you were to fund Initiative 728 in the next year, the next biennium, it'd be an increase in dollars of $1 billion. And $1 billion that right now nobody knows how to find in this budget. So that's not getting funded in 1350, particularly in addition to the required step up, which is about the same in the plan that we laid out in 2776 for how we meet our basic education funding obligation. We, as we wrote that funding obligation 3 years ago, 3 years ago? 2 years ago? 2 years ago. It's been a long 2 years. Assumed that we would use the funds that we were dedicating in the past to Initiative 728 to fund that required step up, that it's a better use of the revenue than funding the original set of uses that were designed for Initiative 728 when it was passed a decade ago with no revenue source. We are going to have to find a revenue source to meet the basic ed funding requirements from McCleary, it's essentially double counting. We think that the basic ed definition that we did is a better use of that amount of money than the set of requirements that were passed in the initiative 10 years ago.
How does this move things along? I know that it looks like there's motion, but is it progress?
I would say that the bills that you see, as well as the budget, reflects the progress that we've made to this point. I think that, and I think it's significant progress on our part. We've been negotiating every day. We've been here Saturday, Sunday, ready to negotiate. Unfortunately, Senator Zerelli was sick for a number of days, so he wasn't able to come, so we weren't able to make progress on those days. But every other day, we've made some progress. And we recognize that if there's any opportunity to be done by next Tuesday, we have to move some bills forward. And, you know, you have to have vehicles to pass in order to get what you need accomplished. But we'll continue to talk and continue to negotiate as we're moving these bills forward.
Normally, the way you pass a budget is the House passes their budget and the Senate puts their striking amendment on the budget and passes it back, and the House passes all of the bills that are necessary to implement from their point of view, and the Senate passes all their bills back over, and then we go to conference and work it out. And there are a lot of procedural steps in there, and while you can take procedural shortcuts, if you have the votes to ignore the standing House rules, it's much better if we move these bills through the process, I guess, with all deliberate speed here. But we'd like to have some visibility both for our caucus and for the public in terms of what our current offer is, and this is a current offer.
Some Republican votes to move some of these bills. Have you gotten any sign-off from anyone in the Republican caucus in the House side?
We're working on counting those votes today. We don't have a commitment for the number of votes that we need, and that's part of the problem of negotiating the budget is we're actually going to have to find out what the votes are.
Well, there's been a five-corner process, so the Republicans are very much aware of where we are on these bills, and they've seen this proposal. They know that they're going to have to bring votes to the table in order to get any of these reforms passed.
This offer's been on the table since last week. Yeah.
The reaction that I've read from Republicans is that this is sort of dead. They're not going to bite on this. Do you expect this will break the impasse, which is what you hope?
Are you talking about the operating budget itself, or
that and the reforms?
You know, I think that what you heard from Representative Dunshee a few minutes ago is a frustration in the fact that we haven't had an opportunity to actually negotiate the budget itself. What we heard initially was that we needed reform before revenue. Then a short time later, it was reform before negotiating the budget. So we haven't had an ability to actually negotiate a budget. The budget, if we want to get done by next Tuesday, has to it has to begin moving through that process. We've been negotiating a set of reform bills, which we've come significantly, I think, toward their position. So I think that if we're going to get done on Tuesday, we need to pass a budget out. And as you know, Representative Hunter said, you know, this is a normal process. You send a budget over there, and you know, if they make changes, then we consider that. This has been a different year, but.
This is not intended to break the impasse. This is intended to move the legislative process forward so that we can continue to have a discussion about this. We have to count votes on these reform proposals. And once you brief the whole caucus on an offer, so you can actually count, can we actually pass something? You guys all find out about it anyway. So we might as well make that offer public so that we can move forward and actually figure out what do we have the votes for in a combination of Republican and Democratic votes. You can't talk about something with 98 people and have it be secret. So we might as well have this happen more visibly to the public so that you can see, one, we are moving significantly towards their position on the reform bills. I think that's the big part of this release, not so much the actual budget release, but we're also trying to move the procedural steps forward, each of which has a 24-hour waiting period. we get done on Tuesday. We'd like to be done before Easter. And the only way for that to happen is if the Senate has a budget vehicle that they can amend. We're supposed to go first in this process. We alternate years. This is our year to go first. We're sending a budget vehicle over, and we'll continue negotiating the whole time. I mean, the budget move is a procedural move just so that we can get through every step in the procedural process so that we're transparent and we don't have to violate all of the standing House rules about timing.
This is your good faith effort on moving on the reform issues.
Yeah.
It's no longer a budget battle, it is a reform battle. Bob McCann said the House Speaker was sitting on these reform issues. He said he's not.
I'm not interested in getting involved in the next year's gubernatorial campaign. We're here to talk about the budget and the package of bills and not comments from people who are not part of the process.
And you said that, and the House Speaker said that these measures that you're outlining today are the significant reform movements. You believe they're significant enough to get the Senate Republicans and 3 Democrats to agree to this so you can move on with the budget?
We're working on that.
And I think you need to ask them that. I think that this shows good faith effort on our part to move forward with both the reforms. And the public expects us to be done within 30 days, and we felt that we needed to get this process moving, and that's why we're here.
I signed a lot of bills Monday morning before 10 o'clock in order to move this process forward that will not make me a popular human being in my caucus. I mean, these are not bills that are attractive to move forward.
He wasn't that popular before either.
Yeah. But, I mean, these are a good faith effort for us to move towards the Republican negotiating position, and we're going to hear these bills. We're going to move as many of them out of committee as we can. We actually don't know yet, do we have all the votes in committee on these bills? We have a lot of work to do today.
Where are you on revenue? Are there any revenue reforms, so to speak, still on the table here that you're negotiating?
Well, they're not actually on the table yet because no one's been willing to talk about revenue until we meet their position on things. We believe that this budget should have revenue in it. This would be a healthier budget with revenue in it. We're continuing to negotiate around those, or we're continuing to talk about it. We're not actually negotiating about that yet. And that will require significant votes in both caucuses as well because it requires a 2/3 vote. So coming to an agreement on things that the Republicans want, part of negotiation is things go both ways. And we're going to have to come to some agreement about revenue in this budget too. This budget, as it stands today, could pass without additional revenue. That's the numbers you heard from me. It would be a healthier budget with revenue. I am not sure that all of the reform bills that the Republicans would like can pass without revenue bills passing. You can see that this is a contentious and interesting negotiation, and that we'll continue doing that negotiation. We're introducing these bills today so that we can move forward. We'll need to have that discussion as well.
The number, you went from $2 billion to $1.2 billion at this stage.
We're at about $1 billion now, and you get about 20,000 jobs out of that.
What money streams now are getting bonded?
Old bonds, you could say that we already have. Bond capacity that occurred because interest rates are so good. There's never been a better time to build with the interest rates that we have. So we will have to we will authorize some new bonds, all under the debt limit, all within the usual box. But we have a great opportunity, and that's what we're trying to move forward on.
And I'll point out that while Representative Dunshee is making positive movement on the job front, this budget eliminates more than 1,450 FTEs from state government. So you're seeing those diverging trend lines as our employment picture improves in the private market. We continue to lose FTEs in the state government. In the last decade, the number of state employees in the general government part of what we do is down by over 13%. When you look at it in state employees per state resident, we've added 1 million people in the state in the last decade. We're actually down in absolute numbers, and before this reduction of 1,400, we were, I think, at 13.4% FTE reduction in general government per state resident.
We have time for one more question, and then we've got to go, unfortunately. Anyone else?
I guess I would just ask, Senator Zarelli yesterday said about these reform proposals from your caucus that they amount to dust. He gave the example of you always sign a 2-year, or the governor always signs a balanced 2-year budget, so codifying that in law doesn't change anything in his mind, and then doing that budget based on a 4-year outlook he thinks is a very minor step. In terms of the early retirement, he says he backed off of wanting to skip the funding payment and closing PERS 2, so he says he's come a long way. And then in the K-12, that really amounts to a study at this point in the Office of the Insurance Commissioner. So again, his comment back to you was this amounts to dust.
And so without going in, I mean, this could be another half-an-hour response. And I think that we've tried to actually negotiate this budget or these reform bills without negotiating it through the press. My response would simply to be that we've made significant progress in the reforms that they've requested. No state in the nation has a 4-year balanced budget requirement. I think the proposal put forth by Representative Hunter would be one of the strongest reforms when it comes to budget outlooks that any state has. In the K-12 health insurance proposal, there were significant problems with the proposal that the Senate had. That's, I think, one of the reasons why that bill never came over to the House. The movement that we've made, I think, will be significant progress in helping particularly those lower paid workers, school employees, allow them to get better access to insurance, as well as ensuring that those that have families and dependents have better coverage. So I would say that it's significant progress in coming to toward their position. Thank you very much for coming today.
Thank you.